Glad to have you joining us. Welcome to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
We're a little echoey today. We're in a different kind of a space, but we're going to do our best to communicate some themes around rest and processing today. Hot off the tail of last week's episode when we were talking about noise and inputs and what do you do when you have so much going on inside your head, and really kind of left it off with the need to really talk about and figure out a way to incorporate rest.
It's funny when you say that. I hadn't thought about that before until you just said it. The stuff that's going inside your head, and then if there was some kind of a membrane, you could think about all the stuff and noise that's going on outside your head. And what is that filter that goes in between the two? Because I don't need more than the 3,000 voices I have in my head. And yet I have a lot of voices around me also, and my environment. And how do we think about our environment, both internally and externally?
You know, there's the invention of noise canceling headphones, but the interesting thing about that is if you put them on just without any audio input, they maybe muffle and maybe block out sound a little bit, but the intention is really for you to play a different noise. So that comes in kind of, dual audio into your brain, and then it cancels out the noise around you if you're on an airplane or if you're in a noisy situation. So it's not the absence of noise, it's the redirection of noise.
Redirection and reduction of distraction is the intent. And so that we can focus on one thing versus the many things that are going on around us. And that's kind of what I was thinking about with that membrane. And so that's kind of an aid to the membrane to stop the distraction so that we can focus, which focus is a weird word for me to even say out loud, being an ENFP, provisional thinker, creative communicator, which means all that to say that I'm bright, shiny object. And couple that with some of my diagnosed ADHD. And sometimes it's very difficult for me. And I find as I get older, it's even more difficult for me to have multiple inputs. There's sometimes when I have to physically say or click stop so that I can concentrate. Because, people might say, well, Gary, why can't you just focus? There's times when I physically cannot ignore something that's going on.
I'm wondering if we've gotten to the point in our invention timeline where we have so many objects and gadgets that are clamoring for our attention all the time, if the actual thing of silence, I was failing to figure out what the adjective to silence was, but if silence itself is becoming uncomfortable to us.
So silence to me sometimes can be its own noise, its own kind of cacophony of lack of focus.
I am finding, and it's a disturbing finding, I think over the last 6 months, I have, my top hits on my playlist are like meditative type music. I will sometimes have to have that on because the external ambient noise or the things happening around me are so distracting, my brain just gets overwhelmed. And so, it's hard to find silence. You would have to almost pay a facility that specializes in noise dampening to walk into a space to have silence, because this day and age, you've got motorcycles and cars and dogs and kids and everything else that's just constantly alive around you, and so it is difficult to get to that place of silence.
So my wife and I don't have kids or dogs or anything else in the house right now, and which facilitates our travel. But this week, I have 3 of my 9 grandchildren living with us, and now throw in the parents of some of those grandkids. And so we went from having 3 things in the refrigerator to so packed we can't put anything else in, which is a good analogy for the amount of noise that's now come into my house. And it's good noise, it's joyful noise, it's happy noise, but it's still noise. And it's something that I've had to adjust to this week, because usually I can count on sitting in my favorite rocking chair and being able to literally adjust the noise by making sure that nothing else is on, and I can't do that right now.
Yeah. So I think that is not necessarily this exact situation, but that place where you cannot escape the noise, or you cannot escape the extra people in your house, or the situation where you're bombarded with, voices at work. You can't escape it. So how do we create, it's not going to be literal silence, but how do we create a space of silence-ish that we can do some processing? Because I think that is where we fail to take the time to really go through the process of figuring out what has happened to me during the course of this day. What are all the various inputs that came my way, and how do I need to think and respond to those?
So various folks over the years have talked about how to get into the zone, or there's the 5 gears, how to get into gear 5, or how to get into that place of flow where you can get into a place where you can concentrate on things. The whole Pomodoro technique, which is from the 1800s, it says that you have to be able to sit and set up almost like an environment where you can concentrate on one thing. And it takes you many minutes to get into that flow. And if you're interrupted, you almost have to start over. And their whole thing, the principle is, if you can concentrate on one thing for 20 minutes, if you were able to do that even once per day, you would be way more productive than most of the population, because we don't do it. We kind of go from thing to thing to thing to thing. So how do we set that up in our lives? As organizations go through that kind of awareness training, many times you will see people like hang something on their cubicle or their door that says, gear 5, or I'm in the flow, or I'm in my Pomodoro time. Almost like leave me alone. So it's kind of like a nice way to say it. Like, it's not that I don't want to talk to you, and that it's better for someone to come by my cubicle than to text or email me. I want that to happen, but I'm gonna just say, look, I need some time to process. I need some time to focus. 2 different things, by the way. I was talking about focus. Processing time can happen with things like, and you'll see this sometimes, people will schedule 50-minute meetings so that there's at least a passing period. Boy, in this day and age of Zoom calls and home office, I sometimes find that I'm going from one call and usually late. I ran over a little bit, because what often happens in the middle of a meeting is you wait to the last 5 minutes, everybody realizes we only got 5 minutes, and then you start making your decisions. Well, then you run to get into an important conversation you don't want to end, and then you're late for your next meeting.
Right.
So instead of trying to go from thing to thing to thing to thing, set a 50-minute meeting so that you have the old passing period where you have to go to the next conference room, etc. How many times do we set up at the end of the day where we process the day?
Right.
An end of day, EOD. In my calendar every day, you will find from 5:30 to 6 is a little place marker that says EOD. I'm not very good at doing it. Every once in a while I'll see it and I say, yeah, I need to do that. And I'll sit down and process and say, well, what didn't go well? What things do I need to take care of? What things do I need to prepare for the next day? When I do it, I'm rewarded with a brain that has less voices inside, less things trying to process through. I was commenting to you that I just came off of a phone call on the way over here, and that, and there were some things on there I need to process, but my day is scheduled to the point where I probably won't. Well, how does that do for helping me get rest tonight when I go to sleep?
Yeah. Well, and I think that is such a good and important point, because we have, using the I statements, I have fallen into a pattern of, I'm so exhausted at the end of the day, the only thing that appeals to me is watching some TV so that I can turn off my brain. I want that numbing effect of TV, but it doesn't provide for the processing, and so by the time your head hits the pillow and you fall into sleep, you haven't done the work of thinking through all of the conversations, you haven't done any of the processing that silence or stillness at least requires. And so, the question is, how good is your sleep? And for me, the answer is terrible, to the point where I get to go do a sleep study next week.
I'll process that for a second.
Sure.
I'm sorry you're having to do that. That is, but you're right. We get ourselves to the point where we are we force ourselves into, instead of incrementally, you've hit a stage where you're gonna have to do an intentional intervention, so to speak, on those patterns so that you can go and try to get back to normalcy. And that's an issue. What can we do incrementally so that we don't have to hit that wall where we have to do something, drastic, so to speak. And that's a big deal. What can we do incrementally? How can we find those little places during the day to process? How do we find those little places? Can you schedule an hour of quiet time in the day to process things and just do that? And just sit still, no agenda, but to sit and process what has gone on during the day and what are you going to get hit with in the future. Because if we don't do that, we see the result.
Yeah. I think my answer would be no. Like, I can't budget an hour of quiet in the middle of the day, but I could conceivably give myself some 10-minute windows. The follow-up question for myself becomes, would I actually sit still? Or would I say, oh, I've got 10 minutes, I can play a little game on my phone, or I can look at social media, right? Which defeats the purpose entirely. It's more stimuli, it's more noise. And so are we people right now capable of sitting still for extended periods of time? And if you find that 10 minutes is a challenge, and I'm raising my hand because of just constant stimuli, it has become a challenge to sit still for that long, that speaks volumes as well.
It's a red flag, or at least an orange flag, that you probably need to do some different things. Covey used to talk about the quadrant of urgent and important.
Yes.
And remember that in that quadrant, a lot of us, and I'm included in this, go from quadrant 1 to quadrant 4, and we bypass 2 and 3. And the way this works, without going into all the details, is you get into the urgent and important that has become urgent because you haven't dealt with it when it is important but not urgent yet, which is the quadrant 2, which is where we're supposed to spend our time in a proactive manner. Over here in quadrant 4 then is the unimportant and unurgent, which is the time killers such as TV and playing a game on your phone. Maybe some endorphins in there, but it gets away from the important and not urgent, and those things that are that can be your true recreation, which is those things like processing or just quiet time. You talk about noise canceling headphones. I do still have a practice every day where I put the noise canceling headphones on and listen to a 20-minute meditation. And I do give my brain some processing, and it does feel like almost like I've gotten some sleep, right? It's almost like a reset, and I try to do that in the middle of the day, and that really helps. I still don't take the time to process as I should, but at least you can do that. So there's 20 minutes of quiet time. It's not a full hour.
Sure.
Can you do 20 minutes or even 10? The funny part of the example of the quadrant that Covey talks about is, he says, okay, when you're in quadrant 1, it feels like the waves are just rushing over, or you're in firefighter mode. And he uses the example of a great quadrant 2 activity that has happened to all of us, and that is smoke detectors. And smoke detectors come from firefighters who figured out what is instead of just fighting fires all day, what's a proactive thing we can do to prevent fires in the first place. And smoke detectors is a great example. So if you can take, even if you've only got 5 or 10 minutes, don't go into quadrant 4 and just waste the time. Think about, what can I do proactively to prevent the next fire?
I like that. And I think some of the answers are technology based to some degree, right? We have those that are working on an Apple smartwatch, has the feature built in where it wants you to breathe, where it wants you to
stand up,
right? It has these interruptions, and I've turned mine off because it bugs me. I don't have time to breathe right now. Come on. I'm joking, but not. I mean, I really have turned those off. How beneficial though would it be if, like, okay, wait, this is telling me my body needs the time to stand, it needs the time to breathe deeply, it needs the time to reset, and yet we are pushing our agenda, whatever that looks like, to get to the next thing. You know, you had asked about what are some incremental things that we can do. One thing I do often do is have nothing on in the car. No podcast, no music, nothing. Not all the time, but sometimes. And anytime I have a guest in my car, specifically my children, if they're in the car, we get in and there's no radio that kicks on or, you know, no music playing. It's so weird, Mom. But I need it. I need it. Yeah, I need that quiet break.
Well, that makes you a much better driver, by the way. You should have my insurance because you'd be getting about a 15% break on your insurance right now if you get rid of the distractions in your car. But I would tell you that you're still driving. Right? And so that requires some of your attention. Now,
Absolutely.
One could argue that driving is almost like mowing the lawn. It doesn't take very much thought, so you can probably do some processing there. But, you know, why is it so hard? Why can't we, if it's so important to schedule our day, every minute of it, why can't we schedule in there 20 minutes to process?
Yeah.
Is it because we've been taught that things only come in hour and half-hour increments, and I'm not even allowed to do a half hour for myself?
Well, or for those work environments we have shared calendars, you know, is there that little bit of a cringe of like, I don't know if I want people to see I've got 20 minutes of quiet.
But wouldn't it be a good example for other people to have in their 30 minutes of process or quiet time?
It would be.
Or focus time.
But I think when we are in this rat race of life and we're worried about, you know, keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with the guy in the next cubicle, you know, I think there is this subconscious pace that we're trying to keep up with and making sure that, well, I don't want to do something that's going to cause me to fall behind.
But we all love going to movies where there's a hero that stands up and takes a stand.
Yeah.
So why is it so tough for us to think that that wouldn't be a good thing to do even on our workforce calendar? You know, and stand up and take a stand and say, you know what, I'm not going to schedule 9 one-hour meetings in my day.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a lunch. I'm going to take a half hour of focus time. I'm going to not just eat at my desk, I'm going to quietly eat or eat with a friend and do some just, you know, relationship building or do something different than just planning for 9 one-hour meetings, right? Take a stand.
When's the last time you took a lunch, honestly?
Yeah, that's a good one. Now, in fairness, I'm not the right person to ask because I'm such a big believer in building relationship over food that I do, and you remember seeing my calendar. But when we worked together, you remember there were sometimes I had lunches with people who were not work related at all, just for relationship building. So I do that probably better than most, but you're right. If I don't do that, I just grab something to eat at my desk, and like most of us these days. But that is something that we should be doing. And by the way, that's not a good thing to do physically.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think and be very accurate in this statement, but I don't believe I have ever clocked out for lunch since I started this job. So in like 8.5 months.
Wow.
I don't remember ever saying, okay, I'm on a lunch break and hit the little button.
Yeah.
Because, you know, everything is app-based now. I have to clock in and out on my phone, but
Is that right? Is that
yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever clocked out for lunch.
Huh. Are you supposed to clock out if you go to lunch?
We have a paid half an hour lunch, and I just keep going. I don't know.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, anyway, the point is, how can we be more intentional and take a stand with our calendars, with our time in general, even if you don't have a calendar? I'm always amazed these days when I meet a young person who's in college or so I've got a 15-and-a-half-year-old waiting for me. And so he wants me to take him to his driving instruction over at Turner's Driving School. I said, well, put it in my calendar. And he goes, what do you mean? So I've had to teach him. He's got an iPhone.
Yeah.
I had to teach him how to create a calendar.
Wow.
And then sync it up and then actually do a request in my calendar. Because I said, look, I live by my calendar. You're not going to get me taking you over there unless it's in my calendar. So I've taught him how to do that. So maybe I'm doing a bad thing. But maybe early on we can, as we're teaching calendar, maybe I should teach him right away as to how to build in time for himself or focus time or time to do scheduling or time blocking, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely throw the question back to you all. Like, are there certain principles or exercises that you do to build that margin, to build the quiet, to build the processing time? I remember, didn't you used to have like a app or a notebook or something that had some prompts that would lead you to end of the day processing?
I still have it, and I still, like I said, when I sit down, notice that EOD in my calendar for half an hour. I sit down, I have a prompt that I can go through. It's a template in my Remarkable.
Okay.
And I can just go through and answer the questions.
All right, do you remember questions off the top of your head?
And I do not. It is what went well today, what didn't go well, what could I have improved, what do I need to plan to do and set up proactively for tomorrow is the basic set of questions.
All right, sounds like you remembered it pretty well.
Yeah, well,
So I think that's a good jumping off point, right? 4 key questions you can ask at the end of the day or in whatever time period that you've allowed yourself a little bit of margin to process. What's gone well today? What hasn't gone well today? What was the third one?
what could I do better?
Okay.
Right? And then what can I proactively do to make tomorrow better?
I think those are some really simple and powerful questions in the effort to process, to have some time of quiet, to reflect back on the circumstances of the day, the interactions you've had, the conversations that were good, bad, or indifferent, and just to come up for air and to rise your head up against all the noise, or above all the noise, rather.
Not all the noise is bad,
Right.
but do we have adequate filters for trying to filter out the good noise and the bad noise, and how can we fit that into our lives? And remember, it's always the basic question is, is this working for me? If it's working for you, great. But if it's not, then the follow-on questions are, what can I change to be more effective? More effective in my relationships, more effective for my health, more effective for my mental state, more effective for my physical state. What can I do differently that would help out and be more effective in those areas?
Yeah, I think some great curious questions. So again, we always welcome the tips that you have, the tricks that you practice, any of those things. So please drop us a note right there on the YouTube page, or of course you can leave us a comment on our main website, which is curiositynotjudgement.com. And I think you and I both need some extra rest this evening. We've been flying a little crazy this week, so we will wish you all a good restful week as well, and we'll catch up next time.
Take care.